everyone, welcome back to Alkaline Hydroxide 784, and today in the history series we'll be looking at what you can do after the exam. So you might be wondering, well, after the exam what can you really do? Well, the exam's already over. You can't do much about what you already written there, like whatever mess it was, whether it was a dumpster fire or whether it was gold, it doesn't matter because it's already done, right? Well, wrong, because unless it's the A levels, you always have a chance to improve. And that's why it's important to take note of what you do after the exam as well. And by after the exam, it's not like the thing I was talking about last week, like immediately after you start ranting to your friends or something, not that period of time, but rather the time when you get back your paper. And that is the best time to know where you went wrong and how you can improve, because so that's actually quite important in your whole cycle. If let's say you just keep studying without any idea of why you make a mistake, well, then it's not going to get you anywhere. You need to know where you keep messing up so that you can actually work on that part instead of just doing something without really knowing why you're doing it. You know what I mean? That's the logic behind study smart, not study hard, right? So after the exam, you'll probably be doing all of your other exams, and then once that's all over, you'll be like, yay, for now we're done. Until the next one, I suppose. And the grind continues. Of course, when the teacher then goes to marking all of your wonderful pieces of work and giving marks to them and a lot of comments, which are very, very useful things. The comments are quite useful. And then your teacher returns it to your what you do at that point of time. Okay, so I think I'll put this into two parts. So first part, I'll talk about the common, or like maybe I'll start with what you do when the teacher gives you the paper and goes through the paper, and after that I'll cover all of the common problems that you might face, and so how you can help yourself analyze your own mistakes and things like that. Okay, so when the teacher gives you the paper, of course you definitely want to be looking at your own marks first of all, even though you'll probably do it with some extra suspense just for the sake of it. But apart from your marks, it's not really that helpful sometimes, so you might as well don't just stare at your marks for too long, but instead look at what's in the rest of the paper. Like actually look through your paper, see what comments are written there and stuff like that. But if you don't have time to do it because the teacher is explaining certain things, then you should probably listen to your teacher first, because in that they don't really have a lot of time to cover the paper itself. There's only like 1 or 2 classes max for this. They have to continue covering the rest of the content. They have to continue giving you new skills for the exam and all that stuff. So if you want to look at your paper in great depth, if you're allowed to bring your paper back home, then you should probably do that. Or maybe if you want, you can just take note of what the comments and then analyze it later on, like just write it down quickly or something. I don't know if that's possible, you can do that. Or if you actually have time to look at it before the teacher starts, you can do that as well. That's possible. So once the teacher starts explaining, don't do anything else, listen to what the teacher says. Because whatever they explain can be quite helpful for you to interpret your comments as well. Like sometimes you may not really understand what the comments say, and if you just keep looking at the comments and not focusing on the teacher, then you will never understand it. So it's better to listen to what the teacher says first, and then when you relook at the comments, you can actually understand what's going on or why the comment was put there. Okay, so yeah, that's the first thing, is to listen when your teacher is telling what went wrong in general, like a general trend. So that will help you to also understand other people's mistakes, because you may be doing slightly different things to everyone else, but at the same time you should understand what are the potential mistakes you could have done but you luckily didn't, or maybe you already knew that you shouldn't do certain mistakes and that's good for you. But if you didn't know about it, you should also get to know about it in a sense. So if there's any common mistakes made and if you're not aware that this could be a mistake, then do take note of it in your head, like either mentally, or if you really need to write it down, and you can write it down. I don't really know how you write that down, but okay, just take note of it. And then afterwards, like the teacher will probably start covering how to do each of the questions. And I think that is probably one of the most important parts of the whole thing. You want to know what's the best way to approach the question and the SBQ, or at least like in the point of view of your teacher, what is the best way to approach the question, because sometimes even your teacher may feel like whatever the approach they have may not be the best approach. Maybe one of the students' essays is the best one. Who knows? So, but at the very least, this has a certain standard and a certain quality, and you might as well take note of what the teacher says. Yeah. So it's kind of like what you do in your tutorial. You write down all of the information as much as you can in a way that makes sense to you. So like you don't have to write down each and every detail and all the evidence, but write down the points, write down the organization of the essay or the SBQ, or maybe you can write down the different ways to interpret the SBQ, because SBQ you can choose to have certain sources in agree and disagree, or the teacher could say that, oh look, someone actually did a different way of organization and there are some interesting points that came out of doing that organization. So if you think that's actually quite useful and interesting, it's like a new insight, because new insights can give you more marks and stuff like that. So if you think that it is useful for your own study or your own essay in the future, then you should definitely take note of it and maybe use it in the future if possible, or maybe just use it to improve your understanding of the history itself. So yeah, that's why it's important to be very attentive during that class when they're going through the exam paper and the different ways to approach the paper. So apart from that, what should you be doing? Well, some people like to ask those who got really high marks, like they ask them for their essay and they read through it. If you think that's useful, then go ahead and do that. I mean, that's entirely up to you. Some people do write very well. So if you know someone who writes quite well and you would like to understand how their style of writing helps them or what kind of ideas they bring, then you can choose to actually, look at their paper and try to understand how they do their thing. But at the same time, don't like overdo it to the extent where you try to literally emulate how they write, because that's not gonna work. Everyone has their own special way of writing. It's kind of hard to completely follow someone else. You may not exactly succeed in it. So instead of trying to emulate how they write, you should instead see what are the good points of their work and also what are the bad points, if there are any, and then try to, like, if the good points can be incorporated in your own writing, then you do that, like that kind of thing. Don't just try to copy paste the way they write into your own writing, because that may not work for the most part, because like they write differently than you. And also, if you try to suddenly write very differently, you will actually feel more panicky and a bit uncomfortable, and it wouldn't end well, honestly, like especially for your time management and your thought process. It'll be better if you can still continue with your own natural way of thinking and writing the thing, as long as, like, rather than completely changing it, you should change minor parts of it based on what are the good points that you see in your friend's essay or something like that. Yeah, so that's the idea. So yeah, that's what you do during your class. So after their class is over and you have enough time to like look at your essay, what are the things that you should do? Basically, you should look through your essay, of course. Like, if you want to read through it one more time, you can do that, because sometimes you forget what you write in your exam. So you might as well just read through your essay again. But if you feel too embarrassing, like if it feels really embarrassing to actually read the essay, then fine, just go to the parts with the comments and then read through that parts and through that section instead. Yeah, so in terms of the comments that the teacher gives, there'll be comments on what you did well and comments on what you need to improve. So if the teacher says something like, oh, you did this well, good job, I like this explanation or something that you give, then you should also take note of that, because it's not just the improvement stuff that you should take note of. You should also take note of the good stuff as well, so that you can kind of continue doing the good stuff in the next essay if possible. And the way to do that is, well, like maybe if you want, you can read through that paragraph, and maybe if, let's say, you have one of your dynamic notes repositories, basically the notes, your history notes, basically, you can update it with what you actually wrote, because sometimes you may write it in a certain way in your notes, but on the exam day itself, sometimes you might be suddenly having a stroke of luck, or your head suddenly can think very well, and then you can write very well suddenly and that can happen sometimes, and you might want to preserve that to use in future writings, I guess. So if you're able to adapt it to a general structure, you can do that and then put it in your notes, because that will help you to internalize that better way of writing that same argument. Or if it's like a new insight, just like how the teachers may sometimes say, oh, there's a different way of seeing the SBQ that gives you new insights, and you actually had a new insight during the exam, then do take note of it as well in your actual notes bank, because it's easier to look at your notes bank than to look at literally everything at the same time. You know what I mean? It's better to just have one single information source to look at rather than look at literally everything. So yeah, that's what you should do for the good stuff. And for the improvement stuff, I'll be just covering some of the common problems that people might face when doing history essays. But in general, when you see the comments, if you understand the comment, then we'll act on it, I guess. If you don't completely understand it, you can ask your teacher, because sometimes they may have some slightly illegible handwriting, so you can ask them. Or if it's because you really don't understand what they're trying to say, even though you can read it, you just don't get it, then ask your teacher again, because that's the best way to understand where they're coming from. And also read through that section that they are talking about and see whether you can think of a way to improve it yourself. Because if you can improve yourself, like if you can improve your own writing, then it'll be easier than asking someone else to help you improve your writing, you know what I mean? Like it'll be more natural sounding and more your style as compared to someone else's style of writing, in a sense. Yeah, so try to do that first, but if you can, then you can ask your friend for help, and based on what they say, then you can choose to adapt it to your writing style if needed. Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at the common problems. The first one will be time management. Of course, you can really, I don't think you would really need to see comments to know that. Like, you would already know that on the day of the exam itself. Or if your teacher says, oh, it looks like you rushed your essay, then I think you would kind of know that the problem was time management. So if it's in the scenario that you have time management issues, despite whatever advice I gave you last time, or maybe I gave it a little bit too late and you already finished your exam and then you realize, oh no, my time management was terrible. So if you're in that situation, what are the things that you can do? Of course, first is to actually go into the exam with a plan. Don't just go in being like, oh, I'm going to write 3 essays. That's not a plan. You need an actual plan. Even before the exam, you need an actual plan. If you have a plan, then you will be more likely to convince yourself to stop at certain times and then proceed to the next paper, or like the next question when the time comes, rather than just being blinded by your ambition to write as many things as you can for SBQ. So in that case, time management is quite important. Like if you have a really good solid plan with like backfalls and everything, so like for example, you can say, oh, this is my original plan, which is to have 1 hour and 10 minutes for SBQ, then 15 minutes for each of the essays, and I have 10 minutes of buffer time. So the buffer time is kind of like a backfall. So let's say if you suddenly became so insightful during your SBQ and you really want to make the most of it and you're slightly running over time, then you can actually afford to do another 5 minutes on your SBQ and write down that extra stuff so that you can get as many marks as you can. But let's say you go in without a plan, and then during the SBQ itself, you start like overthinking and being super ambitious. And by the time your 1 hour marks comes, right, and you forget that you actually need to move on, then you continue to write and write and write, then you might end up spending 1.5 hours on your SBQ rather than 1 hour. which is quite a lot of time actually. So just be careful and actually know when to stop. Yeah, that's the first thing that you need to do in order to help with your time management. Like that's the most direct, on the spot kind of thing that you can do. But if your time management is caused by the fact that you just generally write very slow, or you just cannot formulate your thoughts very quickly, well, that would be a different problem altogether, and that would probably require some extra practice. Maybe like you don't have to actually write the essay. Like maybe if your problem is thinking of the plan to begin with, then the first thing you should do is to improve your notes repository so that you can, when you refer to your notes repository, you actually know how you're supposed to write each of your points. Like even though history may seem a bit like doing a GP essay, right, to kind of write it on the spot, like that kind of thing, there is still a lot of planning that goes behind it. Even if you don't know what the question is, if you don't know what the SBQ question is going to be about, you still know what you can write based on each of the scenarios. You still have some parameters that that you're locked in a sense. You know that your SBQ is on Cold War, one of the topics in Cold War, and therefore you should actually prepare yourself with the arguments that you can talk about for each of the topics in Cold War. And then for your essay, you know that, yeah, you know what are the topics for each of your things, like your SBQ, your essay, your everything. And as I mentioned, like in terms of studying, you had to use the general arguments in your notes so that you can adapt it into a specific argument for your essay. Yeah, so I think it is important to have the notes because it helps you feel a bit more prepared for the exam itself rather than just reading your school notes and just being confused. You should have, instead of reading the notes, you should read the arguments and then keep that in your head. That is more concise. That's actually more useful for your essay writing in general. So yeah, that's what you should do if you have trouble formulating your thoughts. Or of course, there could be another reason for it, which is choosing the question, which I will cover later on. But first, I'll get to the part where you're too slow to write. Okay, if you write very slowly, it could be either that your actual writing speed is very slow, for which I think that would actually cause you trouble in all of your subjects. But if that's not the case, then it's usually because you're thinking while writing and your thoughts are quite slow again. So yeah, maybe you have a plan already, but sometimes, even I do get random thoughts when I write my essay sometimes, and I do want to change it. But like my thoughts won't be super slow or anything. It'll be like suddenly, all of a sudden, that kind of a thought. So it'll be quite weird if you're really thinking every word that you write. That's not a good idea. You must make sure that you plan before you start writing. Like the only thought that should be coming while you're writing is just knowing that, okay, am I following what I wrote as my plan? Or if you just have a sudden new thought, you can just quickly think of how to incorporate it in, or if you can even do that to begin with, and just finish that quickly. Don't take too much time to think about everything. At some point of time, like this is kind of like imagine this like a theater kind of show in a sense. In your live drama, you can't spend too much time thinking of how exactly you're gonna act. You already know how to act, then just do it. Don't overthink it. Likewise, you shouldn't overthink when you're during your actual writing. You should finish all of the thinking before you start. And that thinking shouldn't take too long just because you should have been aware of how you should approach it by reading your notes, knowing how to approach certain questions like the generic versus narrow questions, and you should have chosen the right question according to your strengths and what you know you can do well in the sense. So yeah, speaking of choosing a question, I did say I will be talking about that. I did mention what are the things that you can consider when choosing a question last time. But if let's say you had trouble choosing a question in general and you never know which question was the best question for you, like you're always confused, it either means that A, you never study at all, which means both questions will be hard, or B, you just are super indecisive and you can't make up your mind at all. So instead of trying to be indecisive, the best way to prevent being indecisive is to have a heuristic. As for the option A, I think you should just study more, like what I just said. Yeah, so studying more is one option. The second option is to create a heuristic to help your indecision in the sense. So like I mentioned last episode, use the stuff that I told there and then create your own heuristic. Like basically heuristic means it's something that will help you solve a problem quickly. It's like a little guide to help you solve your problem. So in this case, your problem is choosing a question, and your heuristic is a bit like a flowchart. So let's say maybe the flowchart might be something like this. Oh, is the question general or specific? And then if it's a general question, what topic it is on, or something like that. Or like what kind of time period it has, or who is involved in this question, and stuff like that. So you use those, questions to help you understand whether you will choose this question or not. If you don't like the question, or if you are super unfamiliar with that particular topic, then avoid it. Do the other one, of course. If the other one is even worse than this one, then do this one instead. Like sometimes you just have to choose the less of two evils in the sense. So yeah, do to improve your question choosing methods as well. It's as much of strategy game than actual studying, like as it is actual studying in a sense. Yeah, you need to have a good strategy as well. Okay, so apart from things that are purely strategy kind of thing, let's look at some of the more, during the exam kind of thing, or like your own problem kind of thing. So the first one is a lack of content. So let's say you're either like you're writing your essay, but you don't provide enough content for your claims. That wouldn't really make a lot of sense actually, because usually it's not really the content that people like, but the explanation. But if you're lacking in content, then that means you probably didn't read enough of that particular topic, but you had no choice but to do that question because the other question was just so bad that you just couldn't do it. It's possible to that happens sometimes. So if you feel like you need to have a broader content knowledge, then go and do that. Like go and improve your content knowledge. But if you feel like you don't want to end up studying too many things, but instead want to be able to do any question in that particular topic, then you should be really good at tackling any question. So it depends on your skill set. If you're good at memorizing and stuff, but you're not very good at doing both general and specific questions, then go with the memorizing stuff. But if you're not so good at the general and specific questions, you can only do one of them, then you should go with the memorizing stuff instead, because at least they'll give you a bit more chance of doing the question that you can actually do. Yeah, that's what I can say for content lacking, that kind of problem. Okay. Then the issue of panicking. Panicking too much. Okay, so how would you see this in the comments? I guess you probably will know it on your own, but in terms of the comments, maybe your writing is a bit disorganized, or it's a bit like sketchy, like you write, then you cancel, then you don't know what to write already. It could be due to panic, or it could be due to it could also lead to a lack of time management, and that's why your essay may not look super complete. So there are many the stuff that happens because of this, the many effects of that. And the way to fix it would be to calm down, I guess. Okay, I mean, of course, calming down during the actual exam is one way, but sometimes in order to feel calm during the actual exam, you need to feel prepared beforehand. And in order to feel prepared, of course, sometimes you have definitely studied enough. It's just that you feel unprepared either way. So if you're that kind of person who really studies but still feels very unprepared, I guess you should first look at your own essays, see whether your essays are actually performing well. If you're doing okay, then try to be confident of it yourself lah. Try to get that confidence that you can actually do this. Don't underestimate yourself in the sense. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an exam. It's not like anyone's gonna judge you for how exactly you write your essay in the sense. It's only the only impact of your exam is your grade. So don't overthink it. Don't feel too panicky about the exam. But if it's actually your first exam and you're panicking too much, then it's okay. I think the second experience will be a lot better. The first exam will always be super terrible, but the second experience will feel a lot less panicky because you have more experience, you have more teaching, your teacher would have actually told you some more useful stuff to learn and all that stuff. So that could also be another reason why you were panicking during the exam. Maybe you just didn't have enough experience, and it'll hopefully become better with experience in a sense. Yeah. So apart from panicking too much, okay, so I was mentioning about content lacking, right? On the other hand, we have someone who writes too much content. They write too much irrelevant things and they don't actually give what you want, the explanation. So I'll just cover them both at the same time. So basically, someone who either writes too much of irrelevant stuff or they do not give enough explanation, so their marks aren't very high to begin with. So writing too much irrelevant stuff, well, it's not always penalizing thing or anything. You're not gonna get a penalty for writing too much stuff. But if you write too much stuff, there's two consequences. One, you lose your time, and two, you think that you actually wrote a lot, but in reality you didn't write the important stuff. So it'll be better if you don't write too much irrelevant stuff. It just shows that you don't actually know how to plan your essay. You're just writing down content, and that's not exactly a sign of a good history student. So instead, what you should do is to focus on, you should have the basic details for your content, which is also possible to arrange when you're doing your notes itself. So like your unfiltered school notes will have a lot of details, but you need to filter out only the important stuff and put it in your argument, so that you have just the right amount of content and like not too much irrelevant things in it. And then you can actually include the explanation into the argument. So when you remember that instead of your school notes, it'll be a lot easier to write it again in the exam as a full argument rather than just content, in the sense like don't just regurgitate content, but instead regurgitate your argument and modify it a little bit to make it work to the actual essay, in a sense. Of course, I'm telling this method because I'm not exactly someone who's like really good at writing essays or anything. That's why I have such a method. If you're the kind of person who can look at the notes and then immediately translate it into some brilliant thing, then go ahead and do that. I don't care. But if you're like me and need some heuristics and some tips to actually write a decent essay, then follow what I say. I hope that works. So yeah, that's about it. So these are all of the possible ways you can mess up your paper, or possible reasons why you messed up your paper. So like in terms of your actual paper, it's probably like the organization, the explanation, or your content, or if you're incomplete, is due to time management. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So like the actual teacher's comments will be a bit more specific usually. They won't be about the entire paper, like that will be at the end, but during the different parts of your paper you'll have like very specific comments about a certain sentence that you wrote or something like that. So maybe if you write something that is not accurate, then they'll say, oh, this is not historically accurate, do change that. Or if you write something and then you didn't give enough explanation, they say, oh, please give more explanation here. And you can use that to improve your notes as well. So because sometimes it's like a feedback process. So you use your exam to influence your notes, then you use your notes to influence your exam, and then you just keep doing that over and over again, and hopefully both of them will be good eventually. Yeah, that's the overall gist of what I recommend that you do. And yeah, so next week I think I'll probably be showing you what I meant by my so-called notes. I have to like dig them out from my hard drive and then choose like a section that I can show, I guess. So yeah, next week will be a content episode. I do not know what I'm gonna be covering, but just look forward to it, I guess. So yeah, if you found this video useful, please press the like button and subscribe. And with that, I would like to say thank you and bye.